Hey, welcome. Our next lesson here, we're still working with eukaryotes, and today we're looking at the organelles that are involved in the energy conversions. So you're probably already pretty well aware of what those organelles are from previous science classes. So we'll try to take a little more close look at how they work and what all the parts are. So starting off with the chloroplast. The chloroplast is the site of photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is where sunlight is grabbed by the plant and it is converted into useful energy stored up in the form of sugar. Chloroplasts are only found in plants and algae. So algae is a single-celled eukaryotic organism. It's usually found just kind of floating around in water. Some bacteria can photosynthesize. They can go through that process, but they don't do it with chloroplasts. They just kind of do it on the side of their own cell membrane. All right, a little closer look here at some of the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts have two phospholipid bilayer membranes, just like the nucleus did. They're very cleverly named the outer membrane and the inner membranes. The outer membrane is on the outside, and the inner membrane is on the inside. There's a liquid interior of the chloroplast, and that's called the stroma. That'll be more important when we cover our energetics unit. We talk more about photosynthesis and cellular respiration. The stroma is the site of the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. So it's kind of the second half of photosynthesis. And the light-independent reactions, some of that energy that would have been grabbed in the light-dependent reactions, is stored up in the form of sugar. So within the chloroplast, you'll see it looks like stacks of pancakes. I always thought they looked like stacks of pancakes. And those stacks are called granum. Grana for plural, so multiple. This chloroplast that we're looking at is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grana. A single stack would be granum. And these are stacks of thylakoids. The little pancakes are thylakoids. So closer look, here's our thylakoids. These are the flattened, membrane-bound sacs. Again, they kind of look like pancakes to me. It is along the membrane of the thylakoid, so on that membrane, it's membrane-bound, it's along that membrane that the thylakoid has chlorophyll. You've probably heard of chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is a protein. It is able to capture sunlight. And it's also what gives plants their green color. And we'll talk more about that when we get to photosynthesis in a couple of chapters. It is along that thylakoid membrane that the light-dependent reactions occur. So again, that's the first half of photosynthesis. That's where sunlight is converted into usable energy forms. And in the second half, the light-dependent reactions, that's where the energy is stored up in sugars. There is a liquid interior inside of these thylakoids. You kind of see it here. We've got a granum cut in half, so we can see inside of it. And the liquid interior is called the lumen. The lumen is very, very acidic. Why is it important? Well, it drives the light-dependent reactions. So we'll take a look at that again when we get to photosynthesis in a couple of chapters here. All right, so that does it for the chloroplast. Our second organelle, again, you're probably familiar with it. It's called the mitochondria. The mitochondria are found in nearly every eukaryotic cell. Plants, animals, fungi, protists. I have to point that out. A lot of people get confused and think the mitochondria is to animals as the chloroplast is to plants. And that's just right out. Plants have both, and they need both the mitochondria and the chloroplast. So yes, animals lack chloroplasts, but plants don't lack mitochondria. Plants do have mitochondria, and they need them. You could not get by on just chloroplasts. So very important to note that. Kind of a common misconception people have. Plants have mitochondria as well. There are some cells that have just one very large mitochondria that provides the energy for that one cell. Other cells have hundreds or even thousands of mitochondria. The number is really kind of based on the level of metabolic activity. How much energy does that cell need? So mitochondria, the plural is actually mitochondrion. So when we say mitochondria, we're talking about plural mitochondria. Mitochondrion this is the site of cellular respiration. And that's where our cells are able to break down the sugars that are stored up in photosynthesis and turn them into usable energy, which we call ATP. So just like the chloroplast, the mitochondria has two phospholipid bilayers, the inner membrane and the outer membrane. Now, scientists got cute with this one, and they called one the mitochondrial outer membrane, the MOM. And, again, cleverly, the mitochondria inner membrane, the MIM. So we have the MOM and the MIM. It's along the inner membrane that the electron transport chain takes place. The ETC, that's our primary supplier. That's where most of the energy comes from, is the ETC. So it's along that kind of light brown, whitish, tannish membrane here that most of our energy is converted. There are cristae, that's heavily folds. So the outer membrane is pretty smooth, but the inner membrane just folds back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And these folds are called cristae. Cristae is plural. Crista, singular. So cristae are used to maximize the surface area. Again, it's along the membrane that we convert energy. It's along that membrane. So how do we get more energy? We have more membrane. Longer membrane, more surface area, means we're able to convert more energy. So that's the advantage of having these cristae. There is a space between the MOM and the MIM, the inner membrane and the outer membrane, and that's called the inner membrane space. So it's not labeled here on this particular picture of a mitochondria, but it is very important. Just like the lumen in the chloroplast, the inner membrane space, that space between the two membranes, has a very acidic liquid in it. And finally, with our mitochondria, we'll take a look at the liquid on the very inside. So inside of the MIM, we have what we call the matrix. And it's in the matrix that the citric acid cycle takes place. And that is where we break down sugars into carbon dioxide. And that's why if you ever thought, hey, I exhale carbon dioxide, where's that coming from? Well, directly, it's coming from the matrix. That's where we are converting the sugars we eat into carbon dioxide. Taking a quick look at something we did in the last chapter, both the mitochondria and the chloroplasts have a double membrane. So we talked about that, inner membrane and outer membrane, inner membrane, outer membrane. They both have their own DNA. So here's some chloroplastal DNA. Here's some mitochondrial DNA. And they both make their own ribosomes. So their ribosomes are independent of the ribosomes that the cell makes. They kind of make their own proteins. They both grow and they both divide into similar bacterial cell division. They both grow and divide very similar to bacterial cell division. They're also the same size as bacteria, roughly. So all of this is indications of the endosymbiotic theory. The mitochondria and the chloroplast at one time were probably their own cells. A larger cell kind of engulfed them and started working together, and that's kind of how we got the organelles that we have today, the endosymbiotic theory. And we talked about that in our last chapter. One more thing I wanted to point out. As we've talked about cells, you've not seen that big generic cell that you oftentimes see. People say, hey, label the cell, put all the cell parts on here. That image kind of gives me the green puke emoji. I can't stand that image. Cells are anything but generic. That one cell doesn't really look like any cell whatsoever. Cells, even within the same organism, are drastically different from one another. So if you think about it, the cells in a plant leaf are going to have thousands of chloroplasts, hundreds at least, of chloroplasts. That's why those leaves are green. Their whole job is to capture sunlight and convert it into energy. The roots, on the other hand, of the same exact plant are not going to have many, if any, chloroplasts at all. If you see a root of a plant, they're usually not green, at least not nearly as green as the leaf of the plant. They don't have chloroplast. They're underground. They don't need chloroplast. They're not capturing sunlight. So cells are very, very different, even within the same organism. I got a slide here of human cells. So human cells are very, very different too. There is no one generic cell that just fits the bill for all cells. Plasma cells in animals have a very large amount of rough ER. One of the reasons is that they're constantly pumping out antibodies. They're making proteins, antibodies, that go out and fight cells, fight bacterial cells or viruses. They fight invaders. Other cells lack common organelles. So, for example, red blood cells don't have DNA. They don't have a nucleus. So, hey, how does that fit into that generic-looking model of a cell? Nor do red blood cells, or sperm cells for that matter, contain ER, rough ER. So, again, cells even within yourself are completely different. One cell does not look like a different cell. Your skin cells, these are these guys here, they do not look like your white blood cells, which don't look like your muscle cells, which don't look like your nerve cells. Those guys are weird. Here, this is a cell. Can you believe it? There's no generic picture of that that looks like that. It's a nerve cell. So I don't like that picture. I wanted to throw that out there as we continue through our tour of eukaryotic cells. I don't usually give you that one cell. Say, what is this? Because there aren't cells that look like that. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in. Have a good fall break. We'll see you later.